In 2016, a team of archaeologists in northern Italy stumbled upon a discovery that would leave the scientific community both astonished and perplexed. While excavating a site near the famous cave complex of Grotta di Fumane, a burial was uncovered unlike any other from the Upper Paleolithic period. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary ancient grave, but as experts dug deeper, they uncovered a series of peculiarities that raised more questions than answers. This burial, which dates back around 40,000 years, contained an individual arranged in an enigmatic position that didn't match typical burial practices of the time. The grave was not only unusual for its strange positioning, but for the surrounding artifacts, which included rare objects that spoke to an intricate belief system. Researchers were left scratching their heads, unable to find a clear explanation for why this burial was so distinctly different. Unlike many burials from this time, which were typically associated with the burial of the dead in flexed positions, this individual had been positioned in a way that suggested a complex ritual, possibly one tied to spiritual beliefs that have long since faded into obscurity. Though we found countless graves from early humans, very few leave as much room for interpretation as this one. The burial at Grotta di Fumane immediately captured the imagination of researchers and the public alike. Was it a ritual burial of some sort? Or was it simply a sign of some cultural anomaly lost to time? These are the questions that continue to fuel intense debates among archaeologists. The discovery immediately raised eyebrows because, in prehistoric times, death wasn't just a biological end. It was, in many cultures, a deeply ritualistic event. Every part of the burial process held symbolic weight, from the position of the body to the items buried alongside the deceased. Yet, this particular burial departed from standard practices of the era, suggesting something out of the ordinary. We still don't know the full significance of the burial or the individual who lay beneath the earth. Some scholars believe this was a high-status individual, someone important enough for a complex, ritualized burial. Others think this person might have been a shaman or spiritual leader, possibly one who had undergone a traumatic or sacrificial death. Regardless, what was uncovered was not just a body, it was a cultural enigma, an echo from a long-forgotten world. The site of this remarkable burial is situated in Grotta di Fumane, a limestone cave complex that has long been of archaeological interest. The cave itself has yielded numerous artifacts from the Upper Paleolithic period, offering valuable insight into the lives of early humans. But the discovery in 2016 pushed the site into the spotlight, as it stood apart from the usual findings both in its age and its extraordinary details. When the excavation team unearthed the remains, they were immediately aware that this wasn't just another burial. The site was located in a deep chamber of the cave, surrounded by layers of sediment that had preserved ancient tools, animal bones, and traces of plant materials. The area had been used by early humans for thousands of years, but this particular burial stood out because of the unusual treatment of the body and the items that accompanied it. The grave was located near the cave's back, a place many researchers interpret as a site of spiritual or ceremonial significance, as it's often associated with places of ritual activity in prehistoric societies. What makes Grotta di Fumane even more intriguing is its geographic location. Positioned at the crossroads between the Italian Alps and the Po River plain, it was a prime location for early human groups to interact with both mountainous and lowland environments. This gave the people who lived here access to diverse resources, animals for hunting, plants for gathering, and potentially a rich exchange of ideas between different groups. It's no surprise, then, that Grotta di Fumane became a hub of activity for some of the region's most advanced early human cultures. But it's this particular burial, so distinct from its contemporaries, that continues to baffle even the most seasoned researchers. Scholars still debate whether the site itself held symbolic significance, or whether the individual buried there had been carefully chosen for their perceived connection to the supernatural or divine. One theory is that caves such as Grotta di Fumane might have been seen as gateways to the afterlife, with burial practices designed to honour those who had passed while ensuring they remained connected to the living world. This interpretation raises the question of whether the burial was intended to preserve the spirit of the deceased, or whether it marked a ritual meant to help the individual transition into a different state of being. What's even more perplexing is the lack of definitive answers about the grave's exact role in the broader context of Grotta di Fumane's usage. Was it an isolated act or part of a larger tradition? The only thing we can say with certainty is that the site has yielded more questions than it has answers, prompting continued investigation and challenging our assumptions about prehistoric spiritual life. As researchers began to study the burial in greater detail, one question kept resurfacing. Was this a burial conducted after a standard death, or was it part of a larger ritualistic practice? Unlike most burials from the Upper Paleolithic era, this one was marked by an unsettling degree of irregularity. The individual had not been buried in a traditional, flexed position. Instead, they were laid out in a more open, almost unnatural pose. This positioning seemed deliberately arranged, indicating that the burial was the result of something more than simple physical necessity. The body was laid in such a way that some experts have speculated it could have been part of a death ritual gone awry, a misstep in an otherwise carefully planned ceremony. The idea of a ritual gone wrong might seem far-fetched, but in the context of prehistoric spiritual beliefs, it raises an intriguing possibility. Death rituals were deeply significant in early human societies, and the way a body was disposed of could indicate profound cultural beliefs about the afterlife, spirits, and divine intervention. Some scholars suggest that the burial could have been part of a failed ritual, or even a botched sacrifice. The individual may have been intended to be buried in one specific way, but something, perhaps an error in the ritual itself or an unforeseen circumstance, led to the odd arrangement. Adding to the complexity is the absence of skeletal trauma or signs of natural illness, leading some to propose that the individual might have died in a non-violent yet possibly unnatural way. Could the body have been placed in this specific manner to symbolize a spiritual transition gone wrong? Scholars still debate whether this peculiar burial was a sign of spiritual failure, or whether the person's death itself was considered so extraordinary that it warranted an unconventional burial practice. The concept of a ritual that didn't go as planned isn't entirely speculative. Across cultures, there are instances of rituals that were abandoned, interrupted, or transformed due to unforeseen events, such as poor omens or the sudden death of a key participant. In the case of the Grotta di Fumane burial, some experts have even suggested that the unusual position could have been a form of punishment, marking the deceased as someone who had strayed from the community's norms or spiritual guidelines. Of course, this is all speculative. We will never know for certain whether the burial was the result of a ritual mishap or a calculated spiritual act. But the very possibility of a failed ritual opens new doors for exploration, prompting us to reconsider how early humans might have dealt with death, failure, and the unknown. Perhaps one of the most intriguing aspects of the Grotta di Fumane burial is the identity of the individual entombed there. While archaeology has uncovered many graves from the Upper Paleolithic period, identifying the individuals buried within them is often an impossible task. In this case, however, the body's positioning and the artifacts found with it suggest that the person in question was no ordinary member of the community. Who was this individual and why were they given such a distinctive burial? Several clues point to the possibility that this individual might have held a position of importance within their society. The grave goods accompanying the body were not just functional tools or common possessions, but rather items that spoke of a rich, symbolic world. Among the objects found were carefully crafted tools, adornments, and even remnants of clothing, all items that would have been significant in the context of the deceased's status. Could this person have been a shaman, a spiritual leader, or perhaps even a member of an elite group? The items buried with them seem to suggest that they held a place of high regard within their community. What's particularly interesting is that the burial did not seem to follow the typical pattern for an ordinary member of the group. In many other Paleolithic burials, grave goods were often practical in nature. Stone tools, weapons, and occasionally items used for food or shelter. But the offerings found at Grotta di Fumane point toward a different sort of belief system, one that saw death as a passage not just to the afterlife, but to an entirely different realm of existence. This has led some researchers to speculate that the individual might have been a person of spiritual significance, possibly even a figure who was thought to be able to communicate with the gods, or who held the power to influence the forces of nature. Scholars still debate whether the individual's status was truly special, or whether the unusual burial was reserved for someone whose death had somehow been marked by extraordinary circumstances. There's also the possibility that this was a ceremonial burial that transcended individual identity, suggesting that the community might have had a practice of performing grand burials for all members, albeit with a degree of personal variation depending on one's position in life. Adding to the mystery is the fact that the individual was placed in a cave, often considered a liminal space between life and death in prehistoric cultures. This further supports the idea that this person might have been associated with supernatural or ritualistic activities. The ambiguity of their identity, combined with the symbolic elements surrounding their grave, continues to fuel speculation about the role they played in their society. The question of who this person truly was remains one of the most compelling aspects of the burial, as it sheds light not only on the life of one individual, but also on the belief. When it comes to prehistoric burial practices, the position in which a body is laid can reveal a great deal about the cultural and spiritual beliefs of the community. In the case of the Grotta di Fumane burial, the positioning of the body is one of the most perplexing and revealing aspects. Unlike the typical flexed positions seen in many Paleolithic burials, where the body is curled up in a fetal-like posture, this individual had been placed in a seemingly unnatural, open position. The body's limbs were spread out, and the individual was laid flat on their back. Not a customary position for the dead. This particular arrangement suggests that the burial wasn't a straightforward matter of physical convenience, but likely had symbolic significance. In prehistoric societies, burial positions were often linked to how people understood the journey to the afterlife or the world of the spirits. Flexed positions, for instance, may have represented the fetal state, symbolizing rebirth or a return to the womb. The open posture of the Grotta di Fumane individual, however, defies such traditional interpretations, raising questions about what message this burial might have conveyed. Scholars have debated whether this open posture indicates a purposeful representation of the deceased's vulnerability, or if it was meant to signify a state of readiness for something beyond death. Could it have been a deliberate gesture designed to connect the dead with the spiritual or divine realm, allowing their spirit to transition more freely? This theory draws on ethnographic studies of modern-day hunter-gatherer societies, where open positions are sometimes used in death rituals to symbolize the release of the soul or the soul's journey to a higher plane. There's also the possibility that the positioning was part of an unusual ritualistic belief specific to this community. The positioning might not have been meant to preserve the body, but instead to protect the deceased in a symbolic way. Some scholars suggest that the open posture could reflect the belief that the dead had to be opened up to the forces of nature, or to the world beyond, as if preparing them for an encounter with supernatural forces. The body, arranged in this unusual way, might have symbolized an offering or an invitation for these forces to act. Even more intriguing is the idea that the body was placed in this position to symbolize a breach between the living world and the spiritual realm. The fact that the person was laid in such an unconventional way challenges assumptions about the purpose of human burials. Were the deceased always expected to follow specific cultural rituals? Or was there room for flexibility, depending on the circumstances of their death, or their status within the group? This mystery about the burial's position remains unresolved. The open body posture serves as a powerful reminder of the complexity and diversity of prehistoric burial practices, and suggests that death was viewed. Given the unusual burial position, the surrounding artifacts, and the strange significance of the site itself, one of the most captivating questions about the Grotta di Fumane burial is whether it was linked to a dark or occult ritual. Archaeologists have long suggested that burial practices, especially those marked by unusual traits, were often connected to rituals aimed at influencing the afterlife or appeasing the gods. Could this individual have been the subject of a ritual intended to protect the community? Or were they possibly sacrificed to ensure the success of the tribe? The notion of ritual sacrifice in early human societies isn't new. Throughout history, there are numerous examples of ancient civilizations that practiced human sacrifice in times of crisis or to honor their gods. In prehistoric cultures, death was often seen not as an end, but as a transformative passage, and it's possible that certain individuals were chosen to play a key role in this transition, whether as offerings to deities or as symbolic representations of forces beyond the human realm. These individuals might have been seen as crucial to the community's spiritual well-being. The oddities of this burial raise the possibility that the deceased individual was not a victim of natural death, but one selected for a specific, darker purpose. Adding weight to this theory is the fact that the burial occurred in a cave, a place often seen as a liminal space, where the boundaries between life and death, the human and the divine, are blurred. Many cultures, including those of the Paleolithic era, used caves for rituals related to death and spirituality. Caves were believed to be sacred spaces where the living could communicate with the dead and where souls might journey to the afterlife. Could this unusual burial be the result of a dark or even taboo ritual? One that was believed to ensure spiritual protection or communal survival. This could explain the open body position, which might symbolize the deceased's readiness to cross into the supernatural realm. Furthermore, it's worth considering that the burial could have been the result of a specific event, a catastrophe, a famine, or a disease, during which the community believed that a human sacrifice was necessary to appease the forces at play. The idea that such practices could have existed in prehistoric communities isn't as far-fetched. In many prehistoric burials, the inclusion of grave goods offers invaluable insight into the cultural and spiritual practices of ancient societies. These items, typically personal belongings, tools, or symbolic objects, were thought to play an important role in the deceased's journey to the afterlife or their continued influence on the living. At Grotta di Fumane, the artifacts found with the burial were far from ordinary, adding layers of complexity to the mystery surrounding this individual. The items discovered were not just practical, tools for survival, hunting implements, and utilitarian items, but also those with potentially symbolic meaning, suggesting that the deceased held a special status or played a key role in the belief system of their community. Among the objects found in the grave were finely crafted tools made from stone and bone. These were not mere instruments for daily survival, but items that appear to have been intentionally chosen, perhaps for their spiritual significance. Some of the artifacts included animal remains, possibly representing totemic animals or creatures linked to the spiritual beliefs of the community. For example, the presence of certain animal bones, such as those of large predators, may indicate that the individual was viewed as a figure of power, someone whose connection to nature and the animal world was of particular importance. In addition to these items, there were also symbolic objects that could be linked to the deceased's spiritual or ceremonial role. Small, decorative items, possibly jewelry or ritual ornaments, were found near the body, suggesting that the individual was not only someone of material importance, but also someone whose life and death were tied to ritualistic significance. The fact that such delicate objects were included in the burial implies that the deceased's journey to the afterlife, or their ongoing spiritual influence, was a central consideration for the community. Scholars still debate the exact meaning of these grave goods. Were they simply markers of status, or did they serve a more profound ritualistic purpose? Could they have been meant to equip the deceased for their journey into the afterlife, to ensure their protection from the forces of darkness, or to empower them with spiritual strength? Some researchers suggest that certain items like the bone tools and animal remains might have been intended to aid the deceased in navigating the supernatural world, while others speculate that the symbolic nature of the grave goods points to a belief system far more intricate than we can currently fathom. The inclusion of these complex artifacts raises another question. Was this burial part of a wider tradition in the region, or was it unique to this particular individual's circumstances? In other Upper Paleolithic sites, similar objects have been found, but none seem to match the symbolic depth of those found at Grotta di Fumane. The stark contrast between this burial and others. Among the most perplexing aspects of the Grotta di Fumane burial is the discovery of the individual's skull, which offers a cryptic clue into the nature of their death and the rituals associated with it. While the rest of the body had been placed in a seemingly deliberate position, it was the skull that seemed to have been treated with particular care. The skull itself was found in an abnormal state, bearing signs of modification and possibly symbolic treatment that only deepened the mystery surrounding this burial. Forensic examination revealed unusual markings on the skull, suggesting that it may have been altered before burial. Some researchers believe these marks could be the result of a ritualistic practice aimed at preparing the deceased for their journey into the afterlife. In many prehistoric societies, skulls were seen as the seat of the soul or consciousness, and it wasn't uncommon for them to be treated in specific ways during burial ceremonies. Some cultures practiced the removal of skulls from the body or even ritualistic skull shaping to create a visual representation of the deceased's spiritual or social status. Scholars still debate the exact nature of these modifications. Were they the result of a specific ritual, such as a form of skull binding or carving, to enhance the deceased's ability to traverse the spiritual realm? Or were they meant to symbolize something more sinister, perhaps a warning or a marking of the individual as someone who had transgressed societal norms. One fringe theory even posits that the skull modifications might be linked to a belief in soul retention, where the physical changes were meant to trap the soul of the deceased within the body, preventing it from causing harm or wandering. The skull also raises another question. Could this individual have been a victim of some sort of violent event? While no direct signs of trauma were found on the rest of the skeleton, the skull's altered state might suggest a violent or sacrificial aspect to the death. Some researchers propose that the individual could have been part of a ritual sacrifice, where the skull was intentionally manipulated to mark the deceased as a spiritual offering, or as an individual of great importance who had to be prepared for an otherworldly journey. The skull, as a symbol of identity and consciousness, might have been an essential component of a much larger ritualistic framework. Moreover, the skull's condition adds another layer of intrigue to the ongoing debates about the burial. Was it treated differently because the individual was considered extraordinary, or was the modification purely ceremonial in nature? The treatment of the skull, whether as a symbolic gesture, a protective measure, or a sign of violent death, has the potential to completely alter how we interpret the burial and the life of the person it honoured. With all these clues pointing towards something far beyond a mere physical death, the skull stands as a haunting. Caves have long held a special significance in the human imagination. In prehistoric times, these dark, hidden spaces were more than mere shelters. They were thought to be gateways between the living world and the realms beyond. This cultural perception likely shaped how ancient peoples treated their dead, and it is especially evident in the case of the Grotta di Fumane burial. The cave, with its unique combination of natural beauty and darkness, may have served not only as a home for early humans, but as a ceremonial space charged with spiritual meaning. The burial site itself was located deep within the cave, in an area that might have been viewed as sacred or reserved for ritualistic purposes. Archaeological evidence from other Paleolithic caves suggests that such locations were often associated with the performance of complex burial rituals, perhaps because caves symbolized the womb of the earth, a place of both death and rebirth. Caves were seen as liminal spaces where the boundaries between life and death, the living and the dead, were fluid and permeable. The fact that the body was placed in this particular cave suggests that the individual was viewed as someone worthy of this sacred space, likely someone who held a significant role in their community or was considered spiritually powerful. The cave setting not only elevates the importance of the burial, but also places the deceased in a context that links them to the mythic and supernatural aspects of the world. Some researchers have speculated that the location of the grave could symbolize a transition, as if the deceased had to descend into the depths of the earth to reach the afterlife or to engage with the forces of the unseen world. What makes Grotta di Fumane even more intriguing is its location within a larger network of caves in the region. This cave complex was part of a broader cultural landscape used by early human groups for both daily activities and ritualistic practices. Some caves in the area, such as those at Grotta del Cavallo, have yielded evidence of art, including primitive cave paintings that speak to the early human capacity for symbolic thought. These artistic expressions further suggest that caves were places where the living and the spiritual intersected, where human experience and the mysteries of existence were explored in visual, material, and ritual form. Despite the wealth of archaeological finds in the area, however, no one burial or site offers a complete picture. Scholars still debate whether Grotta di Fumane was primarily a place of death, a site of spiritual initiation, or both. Some believe that the cave served as a sacred burial ground for those deemed particularly important, while others suggest it was a place where community members performed rituals to ensure spiritual protection and renewal. The ambiguity of the cave's significance only deepens the mystery of the burial, raising questions about how early humans understood death, the afterlife, and birth. In many ancient cultures, fire was more than just a tool for warmth or cooking. It was a central force in ritual practices and a symbol of transformation. Its connection to both life and death, creation and destruction, made it a potent symbol in the spiritual and ceremonial worlds. The Grotta di Fumane burial is no exception, as evidence suggests that fire might have played a crucial role in the ritual surrounding this mysterious death. While no direct traces of fire were found at the site of the burial itself, evidence of fire usage in nearby areas of the cave and the presence of certain burned materials raised the possibility that fire was an essential part of the burial practices. In prehistoric times, fire was a sacred element often used to purify, protect, or guide the soul of the deceased. Caves, as natural repositories of darkness, were contrasted by the transformative, illuminating power of fire. The role of fire in the rituals of early human societies may have been closely tied to the belief in spiritual transformation. The deceased, in the community's worldview, might need the power of fire to transition into the afterlife, to be reborn, or to be purified of any earthly imperfections before entering the spiritual realm. In the Grotta di Fumane site, archaeologists have found evidence of burnt animal bones and charred remnants in nearby areas, suggesting that fire could have been used in the burial rites. These traces of fire may indicate that the deceased was burned, or that a symbolic fire ritual was performed at or near the burial site. This ritual could have been intended to ensure that the spirit of the deceased was released and carried to the afterlife. Fire, often seen as a purifying force, could have been used to prepare the soul for its journey, ensuring that it was cleansed of earthly attachments. The significance of fire in the burial ritual also aligns with the broader spiritual landscape of the Paleolithic period. In many early cultures, fire was central to death rites, often used to ward off evil spirits or to ensure the proper passage of the deceased into the afterlife. Some researchers speculate that the presence of burnt bones and artifacts near Grotta di Fumane suggests that fire was used in a form of cremation, or at the very least, in the purification of the body and soul. This might have been a way to ensure that the deceased could not return as a wandering spirit, or to symbolize their rebirth in the afterlife. Scholars still debate whether fire was actually used to cremate the body, or if it was more symbolically present in the surrounding rituals. In some cases, fire might have been employed not to burn the body, but to provide a spiritual cleansing that would facilitate the deceased's passage from the world of the living to the realm of the dead. Whether it was used in the preparation of the body, in the rituals surrounding the burial, or as a symbolic gesture, fire undoubtedly held great spiritual significance in the scientific. The burial at Grotta di Fumane raises important questions not only about the individual who was buried there, but also about the society that performed the burial ritual. Prehistoric burial practices, especially those as complex and symbolic as this one, often reflect the broader social and cultural values of the community. The careful positioning of the body, the inclusion of grave goods, the possible use of fire, and the sacred cave setting all point to a society that viewed death as a powerful event worthy of careful ritual and possibly even social differentiation. But what can we infer about the social structure of the group that carried out this ritual? One possibility is that this individual's burial suggests the presence of social hierarchies within the community. The special treatment of the deceased, marked by ritual, symbolic offerings, and an exceptional burial location, implies that the individual might have held a position of importance. In many prehistoric cultures, those who were seen as leaders, shamans, or other influential figures were afforded extraordinary burial rites. They might have been buried in special locations, surrounded by valuable items, and treated with great care to ensure their journey to the afterlife. This could indicate that the society at Grotta di Fumane was not egalitarian, but had some form of social stratification, where certain individuals, likely those with spiritual or leadership roles, received treatment that set them apart from others. At the same time, it's worth considering that this individual might not have been an elite in the traditional sense of wealth or political power. Instead, they could have been someone revered for their spiritual wisdom, hunting prowess, or connection to the natural world. It is possible that the community valued different types of influence, spiritual, intellectual, or even symbolic, and that such attributes were rewarded with special burials. The Grotta di Fumane burial, with its ritualistic complexity, could therefore be more about the perceived power of the individual's role within the community than their social rank based on material wealth. Moreover, scholars still debate whether the burial was indicative of a larger social practice or a unique event. In some cases, unusual burial rites might reflect the influence of a single individual, or they might be the result of a rare occurrence, such as a leader's death or the loss of a prominent figure, that required extraordinary ceremonial attention. Were the elaborate rituals surrounding this burial part of a larger, community-wide practice, or was this an isolated case? While it's difficult to draw definitive conclusions about the social structure of the community, The Grotta di Fumane burial offers tantalizing glimpses into how the group might have viewed life, death, and the relationships between individuals. If there were indeed social hierarchies, the burial site suggests that the community was sophisticated enough. The burial at Grotta di Fumane continues to captivate archaeologists, anthropologists, and anyone curious about the ancient rituals of early humans. While it may only represent a single moment in the vast timeline of human history, the burial is emblematic of the complex relationship between early humans and death, a relationship imbued with ritual, spirituality, and social meaning. The mysteries surrounding this particular burial invite us to reflect on the sophistication and depth of Paleolithic societies and their beliefs, which were far more intricate than we often assume. This discovery also reminds us of how much we still have to learn about our distant ancestors. Each new piece of evidence uncovered in Grotta di Fumane offers new interpretations, but it also raises more questions, pointing to the limitations of our current understanding. How did early humans perceive the spiritual realm? What did they believe happened after death? And how did they connect the physical world with the world of the unseen? These questions remain tantalizingly out of reach, but the burial at Grotta di Fumane offers a rare window into those enigmatic beliefs. Though the full story of this burial site may never be fully understood, it plays a pivotal role in challenging and expanding our view of early human life. The symbolic burial, with its grave goods, modified skull and ceremonial cave setting, suggests a cultural and spiritual depth that was previously thought to emerge only in later, more complex societies. The rituals associated with this burial indicate a community that understood death not as a final end, but as a process that required careful attention to ensure safe passage into another realm, perhaps a reflection of an early human consciousness of both the fragility and the power of life. As our archaeological methods improve, and new technologies allow us to investigate ancient sites with more precision, the Grotta di Fumane burial may yet yield further secrets. It reminds us that even the most ancient societies had sophisticated ways of interacting with the spiritual world, and that they were capable of conceptualizing death in deeply meaningful ways. The legacy of this burial is not simply what it reveals about the past, but how it reshapes our understanding of who we were and how we have evolved to face the most fundamental human experience: death. In the end, Grotta di Fumane serves as a powerful reminder that prehistoric humans, much like us, grappled with the unknown and sought ways to make sense of the mysteries of life and death. Their efforts, embodied in rituals like the one at this cave, tell us that, long before written history, humans were already weaving complex spiritual and cultural tapestries, seeking answers in the face of life's most profound uncertainties.